Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Welcome, everybody. My guest today is my good friend, Sam Adler. And I'd like to read about him before I ask him some questions. In 1928, Sam Adler was born to a Jewish family in Germany, which fled to the United States in 1939. He earned degrees from Boston University and Harvard University, where he studied with Aaron Copland, Paul Hindemith, Walter Piston, and Randall Thompson, and he studied conducting with Serge Koussevitzky at Tanglewood in 1949. After completing his academic studies in 1950, Mr. Adler served as a corporal in the 2nd Armored Division. During this time, he founded the 7th Army Symphony Orchestra in Stuttgart, Germany, which served to demonstrate the shared cultural heritage of America and Europe in the post-World War II era through cultural diplomacy. From 1957 to 1966, Mr. Adler served as professor of composition at the University of North Texas College of Music. Between 1966 and 1995, he served as professor of composition at the University of Rochester's Eastman School of Music. And from 1997 until very recently, he was a member of the composition faculty at Juilliard. He is also the author of 3 books, Choral Conducting, Sight Singing, and The Study of Orchestration, which, word has it, is the best of its kind since Hector Berlioz's treatise on instrumentation, written in 1844. He has also contributed numerous articles to major magazines, books, and encyclopedias published in the US and abroad. His works as a composer have also been showcased by leading orchestras around the world, including the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Mannheim National Theater Orchestra, and the St. Louis Symphony. Performances of his compositions have been recorded on several record labels, including Albany Records, Lynn Records, Navona Records, and Naxos Records. His articles, performances, and award are too numerous to mention here. Of course, you can read more about him online. So, Sam, first, regarding the St. Louis Symphony, which I just mentioned, I just finished interviewing Leonard Slatkin a few hours ago. I'm wondering, was he the conductor when your piece was performed?
Yes, he was, and he's also going to premiere in the next season, 21-22. He is opening the season in Detroit with a new orchestral work of mine.
Wow.
So we have had a long relationship. He also, when he was in music director of the National Symphony, he commissioned a piece for the dedication of the new organ in the Kennedy Center. So we've had a long relationship, and his wife, Cindy McTee, actually had my position at North Texas until she retired from there.
Oh,
so
right.
we have all kinds of relationships.
Yes.
By the way, you didn't mention my 4th book, which is an autobiography. It's called Building Bridges with Music.
I must read it.
Can easily be obtained at Amazon.
Okay, great plug. And I'm sure it's going to be really interesting.
It's fun.
Yeah. Can you tell me, we had a nice chat in your apartment that Juilliard supplied to you when you taught there all those years.
Right.
So each week, as I did, going to the university at Buffalo from LaGuardia Airport for 19 years weekly, you came to New York weekly for how many years about?
20 years, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And that the trip got harder and harder as I grew older and older. And I thought at 89, I finally retired.
Yes.
So, because I went into LaGuardia every week from Detroit. We live in Ohio, and the nearest airport to go to New York is in Detroit. So I drove to Detroit and flew to New York every week.
It's
But,
great.
you know, the students were so great, and I love teaching, and both at, well, all the three schools that I've taught at, I've loved the students, and we've had great relationships.
I consider you the American equivalent of Nadia Boulanger. You probably have taught more students in this country than any other composer. I'm just imagining, but
You know, my best friend at Juilliard was a man who you wouldn't associate with me over the years, Milton Babbitt, but we were the closest friends. And he used to say, Sam, if you didn't teach them, then I did.
that's funny. You know, he was a great guy. I mean, I had a nice relationship with him. I had a piece published when I was with Schirmer's working that he wrote. He handed me a piece he wrote in 1938.
You know, his mass.
His Mass. You know about that?
Oh, yes. And I know all about the Schirmer and your relationship with him.
Did you know he handed me the Kyrie stapled together and then the Gloria stapled together, you know, just separate movements. And I got home and I couldn't find the credo. I was devastated. I thought, was this his only copy? I don't think it was, but because it was handwritten. So I called him up and I said, Milton, I can't find your credo. He goes, my boy, I don't believe in credos. I didn't write one. So,
well, you know, he was Jewish, and I also wrote a mass without a credo.
oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
It's not called Missa Brevis. What's it called?
No, it's actually called Transformational Man. It's an ecumenical mass that in every movement, it does have the Latin text, but in between is a text from the Protestant and from secular and from the Jewish service. And it's for chorus, brass quintet, and organ.
Wow, very ecumenical. Now I'm led to ask the question I was going to ask later on, but it feeds right into it, that the piece that I think did the American premiere of.
You did.
You were commissioned to write and zu unserer Zeit sprechen, or speaking in our time, which was in how many, 3 or 4 different languages? Like the last movement was in Hebrew and it was in German.
First movement in German, the second movement in Latin, third movement in Hebrew, fourth movement in English. Now, I believe in that because I believe that music is a universal language, and one can speak lots of languages in music. You know, it's been a pleasure throughout my life to write a lot of choral music. You didn't mention it, but I will mention it. When I got out of the Army, I went to Dallas, Texas to become music director at Temple Emmanuel. And we had a chorus of 100 voices. And we did so much music that has now been neglected because Jewish organizations don't have big choruses anymore. But we did not only the Bloch and the Mio sacred service, but we did Castelnuovo Tedesco and many others, including my own. So that that's a very rich tradition, which is almost lost, except for the Milken Foundation has Milken, the archives,
Right.
And they've preserved a lot of that music.
A lot of CDs made.
Yeah. 120 CDs.
Wow, that's fantastic. I not in my bio is a lot about my association with synagogues and Jewish choirs. I've started Jewish choirs. I've conducted for the high holidays.
Mhm.
Never had the pleasure of, you know, conducting your music, choral music, except that one piece, because the music was supplied by, you know, the cantor and the shul.
Yeah.
But
Usually that's not the greatest music, because
no.
there was a great renaissance of music for the synagogue starting in 1930, or actually a little before then, and ending in 1960, when the youth movement sort of took over.
Yeah.
Before then, I mean, so many composers came from Europe who had studied with all the great masters, including Schoenberg, and even Kurt Weill wrote a piece for the synagogue, you know, so that
I know the piece. I'm trying to think of the name. I can.
Kiddush by Kurt Weill.
What's that?
A Kiddush by Kurt Weill.
I know it. I've performed it. It's gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have, you know, there's so much music, but I have decided not to write anymore for that venue because there's no reason to write for it since there are no choirs. So I just write sacred and secular music for choruses like yours.
Right. Good for you. Yeah, it's sad because synagogues with rich traditions now have cantors who strum the guitar, and it's
That's
just
right. I'm not interested in that.
No, I'm not either. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of Speaking in Our Time, or Zu unserer Zeit sprechen?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you that
I'm sorry.
it was commissioned for
I conducted in New York.
Kristallnacht celebration or commemoration, really, in Dresden by the Dresden Chamber Choir, which is an outstanding group in Europe. And the conductor is, his name is Hans Christoph Rademann, who took over the Bach choruses in Stuttgart. They did a fantastic job. It's a group of 36 singers. They did it on Kristallnacht 2018, which was the 80th anniversary of that time. And of course, as a child, I lived through the event, and it was quite a traumatic experience.
Yes.
My father was taken to concentration camp. We didn't know whether we would ever see him again. And it was that day that we received our passports to come to America. And if my father had stayed home, he would not have been arrested, but he tried to get into Holland and they caught him at the border. He came home after 4 days and we were able to come to America.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did he come home? How did he get out of the concentration camp?
Well, on the 4th day after Kristallnacht, President Roosevelt pulled back the American ambassador from Berlin and said, we cannot do business with barbarians who treat their own citizens that way. And so the Nazis led 50,000 Jewish men who they took into concentration camps on the 10th of November and let them out, and my father was among them.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me at the premiere of your work, there were 1,500 or so people there in the huge church, which that morning during the service, the Sunday morning service, had only 25 or so congregants.
Well, you know, that is really true in Europe. You know, here's my experience with this. About 15 years ago, the largest church in Mannheim, where I was born, the largest Protestant church, commissioned, they have the Bach choir of Mannheim, which is a conglomeration of 10 Bach choruses all over Germany, Leipzig and Stuttgart and Mannheim, different cities. And the Bach choir of Mannheim commissioned me to write an oratorio, the entire book of Jonah. And they performed it beautifully. And in the morning, my wife Emily and I went to services because, well, the music director and the organist was a friend of mine. And so we wanted to, you know, be collegial.
Yeah.
So we went to services. There were 25 people there. They're all, excuse me for saying so, old ladies. And afterwards, we took the music director to lunch. And we said, Johannes, you know, this is terrible. I mean, only 25 people. He said, look, Sam, we charge 10 euros for the afternoon concerts. It's sold out, 1,500 people. We get 25 people, 30 people in the morning. That's why we have concerts every Sunday afternoon. And we sell out.
Oh my.
That's the difference in Europe.
Yep.
People don't go to services, but they will go to a sacred music concert every Sunday.
Well, at least we have that going for us, that people are interested in our music, and your music, and yeah, that's great.
Well, we had a great crowd.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, for the concert at the church with your choir.
Yeah, we did. Well, it's all about promotion and hanging in there, and you know, I work hard to bring people to my concerts of contemporary music when I do Bach.
And lots of my students.
I know. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, going back to Detroit for a minute, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but one time coming home from Buffalo, my plane was diverted to
on the plane.
Yeah, you were right across the aisle from me.
That's right.
At LaGuardia Airport, I was going to my car and you were going wherever you were going, but I couldn't keep up with you. You were in your early 80s and I still couldn't keep up with you. So you're amazing. So
I've slowed down a little.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask, what are some tips and guiding principles you give your composition students generally?
Well, I believe in technique. I think a composer has to have technique. All the great composers of the past and present that have deserved reputations and are performed had great technique. And that's what Boulanger taught, by the way, as did all the other great teachers. I mean, my teachers, Paul Hindemith, he could go to the board and write. He once in class wrote a movement of the English horn sonata on the board while he was explaining every note he was putting down. And I copied it and he sent it just like that to the publisher. That's the kind of technique he had. And I feel that I've always tried to do that with my students. I never taught style or anything. That's up to them. We do analysis, we do exercises in counterpoint, in melody, all kinds of things. And they bring me stuff that they write, and I try to read into their own style and not try to change it or have them in any way copy my style, whatever it is. I think they thrive that way, especially by analysis.
Right. Do you use Shankarian analysis? Do you believe?
No, I'm not a Shankarian. I use regular analysis of all kinds. I mean, certain Shankarian ideas are excellent, and I use those too. But I'm not a strict anything.
Right.
Even in style, I think one should do what one wants to do at the moment.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Hindemith the opposite of that? Hindemith students, he wanted to.
Exactly, that's right. Hindemith, I studied with Hindemith during the last year of my master's degree at Harvard. And during this season, Irving Fine, who was my very close friend and my sort of advisor, said, Sam, you need to get out of being a little Powell.
A little Powell?
Powell Hindemith, a little Powell.
Oh.
I want you to study with Copeland. He's going to change you into a different direction. Wow. I said, I would love to. And this is what happened. He called Copeland, and Copeland said, why don't you have him send me a few of his pieces? I'll see. I sent him 5 pieces. After a week, he sent them back with a letter I'll never forget. Mr. Adler, I'm sorry, but I don't want you as a student because I can't see anything fresh in your music.
Really?
Well, I was devastated.
Of course.
I went to Irving and I really cried. And I said, Copeland, I mean, the composer of our time, doesn't want me as a student, doesn't think I have it. So he called him right on the spot and said, Aaron, I'm telling you, this boy can do it. I want you to take, you can be great for him. So he said, okay, I'll take, on your advice, I'll take him. Well, I'll tell you, the first lesson, he said, Sam, you're not going to like the summer because I'm going to be tough on you. And he was, and it changed my whole outlook on music. And he was the best thing, and not right there, but we became really close friends. After I got out of the army, I asked him to write a letter of recommendation. He said, Sam, first of all, you have to prove to me that you're a composer, not a conductor. I've always thought you were a real conductor and you should be that instead of a composer. I said, no, I want to be a composer. He said, well, you have to prove it to me. 10 years later, this was 1953. In 1960, I was at University of North Texas and he came as a guest. And on the way from Dallas to Denton, he took out a letter and said, Sam, here's a letter of recommendation. I know you don't need it anymore, but I heard your first and second symphony and your first opera, and I think you've become a composer. That was the greatest thrill in my life.
Yeah, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was devastated once when Paul Maynard, who I studied choral conducting with, made me cry, and it changed my life because I started thinking more deeply than ever.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story. I just want to go back for a moment to this commissioning program that I actually didn't mention, but I want to go back to the young composers. The Morton Gould,
ASCAP.
the ASCAP Foundation, and I worked together to commission 50 young composers, and who all won the Morton Gould ASCAP Foundation Morton Gould Young Composer Award.
Mm-hmm.
And I think out of the 50, 20 of them studied with you.
That's right.
They all raved about you. But I'm sure you were not easy with them, and that's what they need. You know, yeah, that's great. Wikipedia says musicologists have noted that Adler's works incorporate a wide range of compositional techniques, including free atonality, diatonicism, and serialism. In addition, he is recognized for interweaving dance rhythms, folk themes, ostinati, and devices associated with aleatoric music throughout his scores. Now, there are countless composers who use one or two of those, but how are you able to integrate so many of these ideas, I mean, in your compositions?
Well, when I start a composition, I don't think of style. I just write what I want to write. If it comes out cereal, great. If it comes out cornflakes, great. You know, the whole thing about the description in our time of different styles, I don't think you have to, for instance, when you write an opera or a choral piece or anything to do with the text should inspire you to do what musically will enhance that text. I mean, you write an opera and there's a love scene, should be different from a murder scene, you know, and the same thing in choral music. If you write a sacred text, which you really believe in, then you don't want to use a certain style that you used before. And you go, I think, at least I have gone through different stages. You know, at the first, you study with people like Hindemith and Piston and Copeland. You want to emulate your teachers because you love their music so much. And my early pieces are definitely influenced. I mean, my wife and I went overseas to to do a whole set of my orchestral music. She's a conductor, and she conducted the state orchestra of Brandenburg in this set. And the first and second symphony are definitely influenced by Piston and Copland. I mean, you don't hear exact quotes or anything, but the style is in that way. And then you move away, and certainly Hindemith influenced, for instance, my first and second string quartet and so on, you know, these things. But then you also are influenced by the time. And during the late 60s, 70s, when I first went to Eastman, there was a groundswell of 12-tone music. You know, everybody tried serialization. So did I. I mean, or also the whole idea of trying to do something with improvisation in music and so on. So that influenced, let's say, I could call it a middle period, you know. And then finally I decided, what the heck, I'm going to do what I want to do. And however, I look at the music that is serial of mine, it doesn't sound very much like the other music, because I was never strict at it, you see.
Right.
And so I feel that one has to let oneself go. I have lots of fun writing. And so I've written a lot, and I don't care. That's fine.
Great. Wonderful. Your story about Copland, you know, sending your music back, and reminds me of when Ravel entered the Prix de Rome 3 times. He never won
Never
it.
got it.
You know, I mean, history is replete with stories like that.
Oh, look, and how. And look at the most commonly loved opera of all times is Carmen. And it was a complete disaster the first time it was done. I mean, it's hard to believe. It's the same thing with Traviata even.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And what happened with the Rite of Spring at the first performance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that story is not quite accurate, because the reason they booed was because of the ballet and the nudeness, you know.
Oh, okay.
That was the reason, not so much the music. I mean, they didn't care so much about the music, but they did care about the vulgarity on stage.
Oh.
That's the main thing. And I think it's been corrected. Well, look, the music was revolutionary too, but, you know, and I think the French really liked the nudity anyway.
And then Stravinsky had to escape through a back window or backstage or something like that because of the violence, and the police were called in.
And so did Schiller. When the robbers were first performed, he had to go through a backroom window in a lavatory.
Did you ever have to escape from a no, I'm like kidding. Before we go, I mean, you told me that story when Hindemith was conducting an ensemble that you were playing in, and then he started to play with you instead of conducting, or maybe it was the opposite. And do you feel comfortable telling that story?
No, I can tell it. Hindemith, when he came to Harvard, the first thing he did was to organize a collegium musicum, because we had to learn music from pre-Bach times, you know. And so the first thing we did was the Marchand Mass.
Oh, I love it.
And he arranged it. He did not believe in a cappella music. He said that's impossible. The pieces were too difficult, not only in those days, but even today. He thought that Palestrina and all those composers wrote music for choir without instruments, but all the voices were always doubled. I don't know where he got that from, but he really believed in that.
Wow.
So he had a wonderful arrangement of the Marchand Mass for 2 violas, 2 cellos, 2 trombones, and 2 bassoons. Very dark color, beautiful. Well, he at that time had arthritis in his left hand, and sort of played a little out of tune. Well, I was the other violist, you see. So we played together and we had a rehearsal on Friday, and it was not too good. I mean, he played pretty badly out of tune. Well, so we got together afterwards and said, Sam, you're his student. You tell him not to play. I said, are you kidding? I'm telling him not to play. What are you talking about? So on Monday, we had another rehearsal, and we would think all weekend. None of us could sleep. We just thought, what are we going to do? So he said, look, Sam, we'll completely fall apart. Rhythmically. We won't play together. So, and you say, Professor, why don't you conduct? Then we can do it very easily. And I can play loud and we don't need to.
Right.
Said, okay. So he conducted, of course, it was perfect right away. So he stopped and said, very clever, boy, very clever. I play a little out of tune because I have arthritis, but I will conduct. We could do. So we never had any problems.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Now, you know, he wrote wonderful a cappella choral music.
Oh, listen, the greatest influence for my early choral music was the 6 chansons.
Yeah.
Which are masterpieces.
Masterpieces, absolutely, every one.
And the madrigals, 5-part madrigals.
Here on my shelf, I did a whole concert of his madrigals. Yeah.
Well, now you can do a whole concert of my madrigals, so that'll be fine.
Okay.
They sound just, the first 5 sound just like Hindemith.
That's a riot. Well, I'd like to see them. I'd like
to I'll send you a record. There's a beautiful recording of the North Texas Choir doing them. I'll send it to you.
There are so many really good university choir. Yeah.
Oh, we had a great conductor there, McKinley. He was the first. That chorus was the first to do the Kodai Salmus Hogargus with the Dallas Symphony on RCA Victor.
Wow.
Yeah,
There are professional level college choirs in this country.
Oh, fantastic.
And of course.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the story.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Do you give us one more story about any, famous person?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I don't know if people remember Jascha Heifetz. I hope they do.
Of course.
He was the greatest violinist of his time. I was a violinist and a violist, and he was my God in those days. And I was in graduate school at Harvard, and his daughter, Josephine, was a classmate of mine. And she heard I was going to Tanglewood in 49, and Kusevitsky that was his last year of conducting. He did teach the next summer again, so I studied with him for the 2 summers. But in 49, I was a student of Copeland's, and when Josephine heard that I was going to be there, she said, my dad is going to play the Tchaikovsky concerto because the last concert that Kusevitsky did was his favorite composer, all Tchaikovsky, Romeo and Juliet, and the violin concerto, and the 5th Symphony. Well, she said, if you're there, I'm going to come to see Daddy, and I'll introduce you. I said, oh, well, fantastic. So we, after the Tchaikovsky, which was fabulous performance, we went backstage, and she said, Daddy, this is Sam Adler. He's a composer in my class. He said, Sam Adler, listen, you probably have a violin sonata in your pocket. Don't take it out. I'm not going to play it. But that's not the end of the story.
Okay.
30 years later, exactly 30 years later, I taught a Jan plan, in January. Some schools have, you can take a course for 1 month and you get a semester's credit. Well, they had a Jan plan at the University of Southern California where he was teaching, and I taught a course in composition for her. And my best friend, Grant Beglarian, was the dean. And he called me one afternoon and said, Sam, Joyce, his wife, and I are invited to the Heifetz's tonight. Joyce is not feeling well. Why don't you come with me? I said, well, did you ask Heifetz if I could come? He said, no, he's expecting 2 people, so you'll come. So we go to this beautiful house at the Hollywood Hills, ring the bell. Heifetz opens the door. He looks at me and says, Sam Adler. I said, you can't possibly be. He said, I never forget anybody. I never forget anybody. I even remember what I told you. You probably have a sonata in your pocket and don't take it out. I'm not going to play it. But you'll be happy to know that last week, Grisha, that's Piatigorsky, Istomin and I played your first piano trio.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an amazing
But
story.
imagine 30 years later, the guy opens the door. He had the most unbelievable memory, not only for music. I mean, he could play anything by heart after playing it through once. And he had the same memory for, for people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's quite a story. I've always remembered it.
I just recently heard segments of Yo-Yo Ma playing the 6 Bach cello suites in a row at the proms with no break. That's 2.5 hours of memorizing. I mean, it always astounds me. Like Paul Jacobs, the organist at Juilliard, how he can play all of Bach's music by heart, all of Bach's organ music.
Paul Jacobs.
Yeah. He
He plays all of Messiaen also.
Oh.
Yeah.
From memory.
Yeah.
But he gave one concert that started at 6 in the morning and ended at midnight. It was all Bach.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man.
In my time, there was an organist called Elsasser, and he also did all the Bach works by heart. There are people who have that kind of, for instance, Barenboim knows 800 pieces of orchestral music that he conducts by heart.
Yeah.
And Rattle also is one of those people that has that kind of memory. It's incredible.
And Ozawa and Dudamel.
Yeah.
So and they not only know it by heart, but they put their heart and soul into it. They interpret it beautifully. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
I don't have that skill at all. But wow.
What's funny is that my memory of pieces is more clear now than it was 40 years ago.
You mean pieces you wrote or pieces you heard?
Oh, pieces that I've conducted. I've conducted so much in my life, choral music, but especially orchestral music, band music, and I could conduct much of that repertoire by heart now.
Okay, I'm in the presence of greatness.
But I'm not doing it anymore. I got a bad right shoulder.
Okay, well, can you compose with your left hand?
No, I compose with my right hand, but conducting I'm talking about.
I know. Well, when Elliott Carter was 103, he said he couldn't any longer write pieces with piccolo because he couldn't reach the top line anymore.
I have to tell you one funny story about that. When he was 102, after Milton Babbitt died, there was a reception in Joe Polisi's office at Juilliard, and everybody was there, Carter and every composer in New York. And I was there, and somebody had to push the wheelchair of Carter's, and that boy came over to me and said, Mr. Adler, Mr. Carter wants to talk to you. So I went over, and he said, Sam, come closer to me. He said, I have to tell you something. When I was at Eastman 20 years ago, you conducted my concerto for 2 orchestras. It was the best performance I ever heard. But then I tell you this, I'm getting a little old. I'm getting a little old at 102. I'm getting a little old, and sometimes I forget the ranges of the instruments. So I'm so glad you wrote an orchestration book.
That's what a compliment that is.
Yeah.
I was going to actually go back to your book because it's amazing. I was going to ask you, because I know it's the book for orchestration, and has been for a long time. I mean, how does one do that? How do you know? Have you consulted with every like a professional player of every instrument in the book to learn all the ins and outs, or you just know these things somehow?
Well, since I was 12 years old, I played in orchestras. And since I was 14, I've conducted orchestras. I was lucky to have a high school orchestra, which was the size of the Boston Symphony in those days. And the conductor of the orchestra, who was trained in the Mozarteum in Salzburg, was fantastic, except he was the laziest guy in the world. So he made me conduct every rehearsal. He conducted the concert, I conducted every rehearsal, and he sat out there criticizing me.
Oh,
the greatest conducting lessons in the world. And you know, when you play in the orchestra and are always within the orchestra and study the scores, you get to know instruments. And then, of course, I played chamber music. My father was a fantastic pianist. And besides being a cantor and a composer, lots of choral music and liturgical music mostly. But we played chamber music, 2 hours of sonatas every day, he and I.
Wow.
And then on Saturdays and Sundays, I had 8 friends, all wind and string players, and we played chamber music for hours.
Wow.
And so you get to know instruments and instrumentalists. And of course, you have to study the instruments before you write about them. And I did consult with the very best players. Look, I was at Eastman. We had the best teachers of every instrument there. And I never completed a chapter without letting them read it and okay it.
Right.
Because I don't trust myself with it. But orchestration, of course, you learn by studying scores, you know.
Right.
And I feel that no orchestration book in modern times should come out without the kids hearing every note in the book. And that was the success of my book, because everything is recorded. You know, you can hear every example, you can hear every little squibble that's in the book. And so that made the book. And it's been translated into 8 languages. Wow. And, you know, it's used all over the world.
When did you write that?
The first edition that came out in '83. The 4th edition came out 2 years ago.
And with the first edition, there were recordings along like a set of LPs that came.
Oh, the first edition came on little what do you call those tapes? You know, the little tapes.
Wow.
And it was very bad because we had to go to the LPs and go, you know, just for 8 measures or something. So for the second edition, I was visiting in Phoenix, where they did my first opera, The Outcasts of Poker Flat, and I toured with the group. And suddenly I got a call from Norton, my editor at Norton, saying, you know, I just had a call from the richest composer in the world, Gordon Getty.
Oh yeah, I know.
He studied your orchestration book when he was a student at San Francisco State, and he thinks the New York Philharmonic should record the book.
Wow.
Well, of course, the New York Philharmonic's not going to do it. But she said to him, you know, he's at Eastman. They have a fantastic orchestra and they can do it. So he actually paid for the recording of the entire book on the CDs. And that was the second edition. Then the third edition we did, he paid for another set, and now the 4th edition is online. So when you buy the book, you get a link, and you have the book you have the recordings for a year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I knew Gordon Getty was a composer. Yeah, doesn't he?
Well, he's been very generous, and I can't thank him enough. that is the real, I must say, it certainly contributes to the, the efficacy of the book.
Yeah.
For instance, in China, Emily and I were there for when it first came out, and it sold 5,000 copies the first day.
Nice.
I signed 500 copies.
Good thing your name is short.
Yeah, that's right. Oh boy, it was really something. Chen Yi was there, and a lot of the composers were the vice president of the conservatory in Beijing. Shaogang Yi is a former student of mine, and another student of mine actually was in charge of the translation. It took six translators because they have different ways of translating, and he was the coordinator of it, and he did a wonderful job. Apparently, it's a beautiful edition of the book in 2 volumes.
Wow, very very incredible. So I'm going to let you go. I can talk to you forever. You're a national treasure, and I'm so privileged to have known you and worked with you, Sam.
Well, I hope we can work again.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
So,
and I appreciate the interview, and it was a lot of fun.
It was for me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.